Ever feel like you're just scratching the surface of a really interesting topic?
Yeah, like there's so much more underneath.
Exactly, like there's a whole world of fascinating details just out of reach. That's exactly why we're here. Today, we're plunging into Cuba.
Mm-hmm.
We've got a really compelling mix of information in front of us. Everything from the rhythms of its music and the layers of its history.
To the long story of the U.S. embargo.
Right, and the evolving landscape of internet freedom, human rights, all of it.
It's a lot to cover.
It is.
Yeah.
Our mission is simple, though. Extract the most important, maybe the most surprising insights, giving you a shortcut to being, well, seriously well-informed about this complex island nation.
Okay, let's dive in.
Okay, so where do we start? The history seems foundational.
I think so. What immediately jumps out is the way pre-revolutionary Cuba is described in the sources. It's this duality.
Duality, how so?
Well, on one hand, you see descriptions like a holiday paradise, vibrant carnivals, music.
The image many people probably have.
Exactly, but then the flip side is a political hell, simmering with very real violence. It wasn't a simple picture at all.
Right, so those stark contrasts existing side by side, that's crucial for understanding what came next, isn't it?
Absolutely. And then you have Fulgencio Batista, this figure who dominated for so long.
He wasn't really driven by a fixed ideology, was he? The sources paint him as more pragmatic.
Yeah, very pragmatic seems right. A willingness to shift alliances, do whatever it took, really, to maintain his grip on power.
It's telling that he initially had U.S. support, which then flipped completely to an arms embargo by 1958 as his rule got more, well, oppressive.
Right. And the mention of notorious military leaders under him really underscores the brutality of that time. It wasn't just political maneuvering. There was real force involved.
So that growing discontent plus the revolutionaries gaining ground, that set the stage.
Exactly. It created the conditions for Batista's dramatic exit on New Year's Eve 1958. It wasn't just a sudden collapse, but the result of years of struggle building up.
Okay, so fast forward a bit. The revolution happens, and then comes the U.S. embargo. It has this almost mythical status now, doesn't it?
It really does. I mean, it's the longest standing U.S. sanction against any country. That alone is significant.
Can you walk us through how that actually started? And maybe more importantly, how it's changed over time? Because it hasn't been static, right?
Not at all. The initial push for the embargo came right after the '59 revolution, with Cuba aligning itself with the Soviet Union.
Okay, Cold War context.
Definitely. The formal trade embargo was locked in by 1962. But what's really crucial to grasp is that this policy has ebbed and flowed.
How so?
Well, we saw restrictions ease significantly during the Obama administration. Remember that opening?
I do, yeah. A big shift.
But then the Trump administration reinstated many of the stricter measures, and this whole designation of Cuba as a state sponsor of terrorism that keeps bouncing back and forth.
Wait, I think it was added in January 2021, then Biden removed it, then it came back, or parts of it.
Exactly. That adds another layer of complexity, especially for financial transactions and international relations in general.
The financial impact must be enormous. I remember reading something about Cuba having to pay cash up front for U.S. food imports. Is that right?
That's right. And it creates a huge disadvantage. Think about normal international trade credit is standard.
Sure.
But Cuba has to find the hard cash for essential food from the U.S. That puts a massive strain on their already limited foreign currency reserves.
And that's on top of other financial issues.
Yeah. Then you have the billions of dollars in financial claims the U.S. government holds against Cuba, stemming from expropriated properties back after the revolution. That really complicates any potential normalization.
So remittances from family in the U.S. become even more critical then.
Absolutely vital, but they're also somewhat unpredictable depending on U.S. policy, and they can contribute to economic inequalities within Cuba itself.
It really sounds like a chokehold in many ways. How does this filter down into specific sectors, like, say, education? The sources seem pretty clear on that.
Oh, the effect on education is quite profound. Just imagine trying to run schools when shipping basic materials from the U.S., if you even can, cost more than double what it would cost to ship from China.
Wow, double the cost. That's a concrete example.
It is. So language schools struggle to get modern lab equipment, vocational programs lack updated tools for training mechanics, chemists, you name it.
Even basics like books.
Even stocking school libraries or supporting postgraduate research gets severely curtailed. One source mentioned they'd only met a tiny fraction of the necessary lab requirements for high school science. It's a real, tangible setback.
Okay, that's education. Now, what about healthcare? Because Cuba's system is often praised internationally, right? Universal, free.
Right, and that's where you see this stark paradox. Cuba prioritizes a universal, free, community-based system focused on prevention. It's fundamentally different from the U.S. model, where medical school often means huge debt.
But the embargo must hit them hard there, too.
Extremely hard. It severely restricts access to essential medicines, vital medical equipment, even scientific research materials. Companies are just too afraid of U.S. penalties.
So, shortages of everything.
Pretty much. From basic things like aspirin to critical cancer treatments, even access to online medical journals and databases can be blocked. It's a constant battle.
So, despite their philosophical commitment to healthcare, they're fighting this huge external pressure.
Constantly.
But I also saw notes about their own efforts, like in biotech. Self-sufficiency.
Absolutely. Faced with these limitations, Cuba has shown, well, remarkable resilience. They've invested heavily in their own biotechnology sector, developing vaccines, researching herbal medicines as alternatives.
And they export medical expertise too, don't they?
They do through international medical programs, though, as you mentioned, the U.S. has actively sought to discourage other countries from participating in those programs.
It's also striking how the UN General Assembly views this.
Overwhelmingly. Year after year, the vast majority of countries vote to condemn the U.S. embargo, calling it harmful and a violation of the UN Charter.
With basically only the US and Israel opposing.
Consistently. Sometimes a couple of abstentions, but yeah, the global consensus is pretty clear on the negative impact.
Which brings us back to the question, why does the US maintain it after all this time? What's the rationale from their side, according to the sources?
Well, it's complex, and the reasons are deeply rooted. You've got historical grievances going back to the revolution, especially the expropriation of US-owned properties.
Okay, the property claims.
Yes. Then there's the long-standing anti-communist sentiment, which is still a factor. And importantly, the political influence of the Cuban-American community, particularly in Florida, is significant. They hold strong views on this.
So it's history, ideology, domestic politics.
And those unresolved property claims remain a key sticking point. There are definitely strong, long-held perspectives on both sides of this. We should also probably mention the global energy context briefly.
Energy, how does that connect?
Just that the sources noted the world consumes over 100 million barrels of oil daily, demand is rising, especially in Asia. It just highlights how interconnected the global system is and how sanctions on one country can ripple out, even if Cuba isn't a major oil player itself. It affects trade, shipping, finance, everything's linked.
Right, that global interconnectedness. Okay, let's shift gears a bit. Let's talk about something Cuba is absolutely renowned for. It's music.
Ah, yes. Definitely a brighter topic in many ways.
The rumba is mentioned as essential, and then there's this other genre, timba. What's the story there?
Timba is fascinating. It really emerged in the post-Soviet era, the special period. It's not just a new style. Many Cubans see it as a distinctly Cuban form, almost a reaction against the commercialization of salsa.
A reaction. You mean they felt salsa wasn't purely Cuban anymore?
Exactly. There's a strong feeling among many Cuban musicians that salsa, while obviously rooted in Cuban rhythms, became kind of diluted internationally. Timba was seen as a return to and an evolution of a more authentically Cuban sound, you know?
So a reclaiming of musical identity. Where did it draw its inspiration from?
Heavily from the experiences and sounds of Havana's marginal neighborhoods, the barrios. It aimed to reflect the daily realities, the struggles, the energy of ordinary Cubans.
Makes sense.
José Luis Cortés, a key figure, really emphasized that his music was for and about the simple people from the streets.
And that it incorporates other cultural elements too.
Oh, definitely. You see strong Afro-Cuban cultural references, religious themes, particularly Santeria. It connects back to Fernando Ortiz's idea of transculturation, that constant blending and mutual influence of cultures in Cuba. Los Van Van is another great example of this integration.
Music carrying so much cultural weight. I also read that some Timba lyrics got censored.
Yes, that happened. Lyrics that offered social commentary, maybe touching on sensitive political or social issues like prostitution or chineterismo, as it's known. They were often blocked from national radio or TV, but ironically, that censorship often just boosted their street credibility.
Made them seem more authentic, more truthful.
Exactly. People saw them as genuine, unfiltered voices, although there's an interesting contradiction.
Which is?
While the same groups singing about social inequalities might often perform in dollar entry clubs, frequented mainly by tourists, it highlights the complex economic tightrope they have to walk.
Yeah, that is a paradox. It sounds like the whole Cuban music industry operates under some pretty unique constraints.
Absolutely. The lack of private publications, limited internet access, it really hinders the exchange between musicians and audiences, both inside Cuba and internationally.
But the influence is still there,
Yeah.
right? Especially on jazz.
Oh, undeniably. The historical connection between Cuban music and jazz is incredibly rich and ongoing. Cuba has contributed fundamental rhythms, instruments, and countless collaborations that have just profoundly enriched jazz globally.
Okay, moving beyond music and politics, the sources gave some really interesting sort of slices of daily life and culture, like the ongoing shortages.
Yeah, that's a persistent reality for many Cubans. Shortages of food, fuel, basic goods. It's a consequence of both the economic model and, of course, the embargo we discussed.
So advice for travelers is usually to tack essentials.
Definitely. Pack accordingly and be cautious about drinking water bottled or boiled is the recommendation.
And then there were some, frankly, surprising statistics about Cuban women.
Right. Really high educational attainment. Over 60% of university students are women.
That's huge.
And they have some of the highest rates in the region for female doctors, professors. They hold over half the seats in parliament, make up 2/3 of the professional workforce. It's quite remarkable.
But there's a flip side mentioned too.
Yeah, interestingly, there's also a high percentage of single adult women and a notably high divorce rate. It's complex. But the sources also mention they're generally known for being friendly towards foreigners and really valuing kindness.
And you can't talk about Cuban culture without mentioning baseball.
Baseball and dominoes. Absolutely central to the social fabric. They're more than just games. They're, vital ways for people to connect and build community.
It paints a picture. And despite the economic challenges, there's still a cultural pulse.
Oh yeah, events like the Havana Jazz Festival, the Fiesta del Fuego in Santiago. Culture is deeply ingrained. Life goes on.
What about cost of living? Any sense of that?
The sources suggest a range, maybe $600 to $1,200 a month, depending heavily on lifestyle, of course. Generally more affordable than many Western countries.
And that wild statistic about Fidel Castro.
Yeah, allegedly surviving over 600 assassination attempts, including some truly bizarre CIA plots. It's almost unbelievable, part of the Cuban story now.
Definitely adds to the mystique. The sources also mention specific places like Viñales, Baracoa.
Right. Reminders that Cuba is much more than just Havana. Viñales with its stunning limestone hills and tobacco farms, Baracoa with its colonial history and natural beauty. Lots to explore.
Okay, let's tackle a really critical area now. Internet access and freedom of expression. It feels like this is where a lot of current tension lies.
It really is. For a long time, internet access was very limited, mostly fixed connections in specific spots, like state-run cafes or hotels.
Expensive too, I imagine.
Yes, and slow. But the big shift came in 2019 with the rollout of mobile data. That changed the game.
How so? How did that increased access play out?
Well, perhaps unsurprisingly, it became a really important tool for activists. People could communicate more easily, document abuses, organize protests, share information outside government channels.
But that freedom wasn't exactly embraced by the authorities.
Unfortunately, no. The government's response has often been to restrict access. Blocking news websites is common, but they've also imposed both targeted and sometimes widespread internet shutdowns.
Particularly during protests.
Exactly. The big protests on July 11th, 2021 saw significant internet outages and restrictions placed on social media platforms. It's a clear tactic to control information flow during dissent.
And there's actual legislation backing this up now.
Yes. Decree Law 35 came in August 2021, and then a new criminal code in May 2022. Both contain regulations that severely restrict online freedom of expression.
In what way?
For example, they include vaguely worded provisions that punish individuals for spreading fake news or for funding activities considered against the state. It creates a chilling effect.
And the consequences for people who do speak out online or protest, they seem quite severe.
Tragically, yes. The trials following the 2021 protests were widely criticized for lacking due process, and they resulted in some very harsh prison sentences.
The sources mentioned specific cases.
Yes, like the artist Luis Manuel Otero Alcantara and the musician Michael Castillo Perez. Their song Patria Vida, Motherland and Life, became a real anthem for protesters. Both received significant sentences.
And prison conditions themselves are reportedly difficult for government critics.
That's what the reports indicate, yes. It's a stark reminder of the risks involved in dissent.
It's a really complex picture. So as we try to sort of wrap this up, bring it all together, what are the main threads, the big themes that have emerged from this deep dive?
I think a few things really stand out. First, the enduring impact of history. You can't understand Cuba today without looking back. And related to that, the long, deep shadow of the U.S. embargo touches almost everything.
Right, its effects are so widespread.
Definitely. But then counterbalancing that, you see this remarkable resilience and innovation within Cuba, especially in areas like their music and their healthcare system. They find ways.
A sort of adaptation.
Exactly. And running through all of it is this ongoing tension, especially now in the digital age, between access to information and the state's control over freedom of expression. These forces are constantly interacting.
Yeah, there were definitely moments reading through this, those aha moments.
Yeah.
The sheer reach of the embargo's details, or the way social commentary is embedded in Timba music.
Or even the paradoxes in daily life, like the high education levels for women alongside other social complexities.
It certainly gives you a much richer, more nuanced understanding than you'd get from just, glancing at headlines.
Absolutely. It really underscores that to understand a place like Cuba, you have to look beyond simple narratives. You need to see the interplay of all these factors: historical, political, economic, social, cultural.
So for you, the listener, as you reflect on everything we've talked about, Cuba's incredible history, its culture, the significant challenges it faces today, here's something to mull over.
What single factor do you believe will most significantly shape Cuba's future? And why?
There's no easy answer, but it's definitely worth pondering the many layers we've explored today. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us.